Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tim. This is another Real Ideal Gear review, and today we're talking about proportions and what I consider chunky watches and thin watches, or maybe we might call it stout watches or thick watches. But there's a proportion that's out there that really kind of helps, I think, identify when a watch gets to be a little bit too chunky or too thick for the wrist, or maybe that's the look that you're looking for, is you want something that's really tall or proud off the wrist, or maybe you want something that's thinner on the wrist. And in many cases, when I'm working, I don't want something that's too tall on the wrist, especially when I'm doing kind of like shrub work and landscape work. I don't want to be banging it into things. But if I'm just out cutting grass, I don't care what watch I have on my wrist. As a matter of fact, sometimes I wear the biggest watch that I have. You're going to see in this video my entire collection of watches, all of them, including some of them that are waiting to be sold on my store, which, by the way, realidealgear.com if you're interested. And I also found out when I did this that I have too many watches. So if you have an interest in any of these watches, let me know. Send me an email, realidealgear@gmail.com, and let me know what your thoughts are and maybe suggest a price for a watch. And I'll let you know if that's something I'm willing to sell. But anyway, these watches are my entire collection. I'm going to go through, and what I'm going to do here is two parts. I'm going to do my initial impression of these watches and say whether or not I feel like they're kind of a chunky style watch, or maybe a thinner style watch, or maybe they're in between, kind of that middle ground where I'm not so sure. You can really tell one way or the other. There are some watches that are clearly too thick, not too thick. There are some clearly thick watches that I have in my collection. So you're going to see all of that. We're going to go through all the different styles that I have here. We have dress watches, sport watches, dive watches, and of course, Casios. I have over 20 Casio watches that I go through and just give my initial impression. This is not a review. We're just looking at the watches to determine whether or not these watches are thick on the wrist or thin on the wrist. And then you can make the decision as to whether or not this is something that you would choose. But it gives you an idea of how this all works. And I'm going to share with you this chart. And this chart that I'm sharing with you right now is really a breakdown of all the watches according to diameter and height. And I use basically a calculation and find a ratio for those two numbers together. And so all of these watches I have gone through and I have figured out what that ratio is. And I got to tell you, it's pretty dang good. So now when I go look at watches, I use that ratio. I take the diameter divided by the height and I find out what it is. And by the way, keep in mind, just because it has a large case diameter doesn't automatically make it a thick watch, or just because it has a high height off the wrist doesn't automatically make this a thick watch. It's the proportion of these two that work together that really give the sensation of the watch being too thick or maybe just thin enough. So let's take a look at some of these watches and get my initial impression on all of these different types. So in this section, we're going to talk about vintage watches. Now, vintage watches are kind of their own category because when you get past 20 years or older, the watch styles can drastically change. The dimensions, the specifications, all kinds of things change. You get back into the 60s and 50s and 40s of the 20th century, and you can end up with a watch that's actually very small, relatively speaking, toward watches in the 1990s or 2010s, whatever. So you get the idea. Vintage watches have kind of their own flavor, their own thing. So I have a handful of them here. One of them is not actually a vintage watch. It is a style of watch that really, really closely resembles what it was made back in the 1990s. Okay, so it's a Casio. All right, but we're going to start off with a Caravel, and this Caravel is a 1970s model, and it is a 34 millimeter case. I don't remember what the thickness is, but you can be rest assured this is definitely not a chunky watch. Some of these watches have dust on them because I just don't like to wear vintage watches too much. But this is a fantastic little watch. It is a mechanical movement, so it's a hand wind, and beautiful watch. I love it. Definitely not a chunky watch. You're not going to find a lot of vintage watches that are going to be very chunky. When you get into the 80s, I think that's kind of when the chunkiness really starts to kick into high gear. I just haven't noticed many 70s watches that are really chunky. This is the Glycine vacuum sealed watch. By the way, both of these, almost all of these watches I'm going to show you, I've done reviews on, and check out the playlist for any types of specific review on the watch itself. But this Glycine vacuum sealed watch is amazing. The technology back when they made this in the early 60s was fantastic. It's sealed by air pressure. The case itself has all the air evacuated from it and sealed. But as far as chunkiness goes, this is getting a little bit on the chunky side because the case back protrudes downward. And so you really have a fairly thick watch. So this stands pretty proud on the wrist. So I would say of vintage watches, this is very close as far as chunkiness goes. We're going to put this over here in the chunky pile. Chunky pile goes left, non-chunkiness goes to the right. All right, vintage Casio. This is, let me see here, what's the brand or the model number on this one? The ABC 30. I just absolutely love the title for this one, ABC 30. Chunky or not, this is a calculator watch. It's actually an EDCgear watch from the I want to say this is the 1990s as well. Also calculator data bank. Chunky watch or not? Yes, chunky. It's not quite long enough in my opinion. So these are, again, all of my just guesses as far as what I perceive this to be a chunky watch or not. Now, this is the one that is not actually a vintage watch, but this is watch that was around when I was in junior high in the mid-1980s. This watch was phenomenal for a lot of reasons, especially if you were in math class. You could use the calculator function on here and type in all kinds of cool stuff. So this is a data bank. Chunky or not, it is definitely not chunky. Lots of distance to this. It looks really relatively thin. I think it's totally fine. Here's another one from the 1990s. Just did a review on this one. This is the CMD40. This is the one that you can turn TV channels with, on and off, VCR. It also has a calculator function, stopwatch, and alarm. Chunky or not, chunky. So there you go. We've got a bunch of kind of vintage styled watches, or in many cases, these are actual vintage watches. Not chunky, chunky, but keep in mind that these watches are from the 1990s. So is this watch. And these watches are from, the 1970s, 1960s. Now, this is a very drastically different type of watch as far as engineering goes. So got to give a little bit of leeway on the it's kind of out there as far as a vacuum seal watch. You don't see many of these vacuum seal watches anymore. Somebody did one, was it Cartier? I think did one in the late 2000s. They did a vacuum sealed case, but there you go. All right, what we have in front of us right now are the dress watches, and these are a variety of different styles. But dress watches, I don't know if you can really find a dress watch that's chunky looking as far as proportions go, but we're going to try to see what we have here. Let's start off with this one. Oh, this is the Pierre Pauline Vintage Chronograph. Is this one chunky? Actually, I think it is. I think this one is chunky. One of the few dress watches I have that just feels short and stout. This is a pretty stout watch. I love the looks of this watch. Has a lot of vintage. It has some of that Art Deco bezel action going on here, which I absolutely love. I love Art Deco. If they made Art Deco watches, I think I'd have way more watches than I have right now, which is a lot. All right, this is another Suges chronograph, and this watch, chunky or not? No, because they stretch it out. It has the ST1901 movement in it, but they do a good job of making the case bigger, the dial bigger. Really beautiful looking watch. I love the looks of this watch. And by the way, these are all the watches I typically wear on Sunday when I go to church. Oh, this is not chunky. We're going to put it over here. All right. Here is the Bulova with the precision movement, the precisionist movement, the 262 kilohertz movement. Chunky or not? Definitely not. And look at the sweep of that second hand. Yeah, definitely not. All right, let's take a look at this. This is another Suges. This is the chronograph, and chunky or not? Yes, chunky, and I'm starting to eat my words. I think this might be the last one that's actually stout. The case diameter is really, it's just not quite big enough, I think, to really stretch things out. But you also have the second hand, hour hand, minute hand. You've also got the subdials that they have to clear as well. So you're clearing 4 levels of hands on this dial. And that's going to make for a tall, proud watch. Now, if you stretch this out, make the dial even bigger, you might get away with it not feeling so stout. All right, the Orient Bambino Classic. It's just a fantastic dress watch. This is the watch my wife gave me. Of course, this is never going to leave. And I haven't done a review on it because why would I want to review something my wife gave me? I like this watch because she gave it to me. All right. So there you go. That dress watch is awesome. And the Zeppelin. This is a surprise viewer watch. The number of views that this watch has gotten, it's in the thousands of views. I thought this was going to be a sleeper because I had never heard of Zeppelin. I still don't see a lot of Zeppelin watches out there. But is this a thick, stout watch? Yes, it is. I haven't looked at the profile of this one in such a long time. Absolutely. Man, I'm like three. It's split down the middle. So I'm 3 for 3. All right, that's the way it goes. This is an honest, like I haven't gone through and done this yet. So there you go. My favorite style watch is the field watch. I love the simplicity of it. I love just the aesthetic of it. It's just the history, obviously, more of a everyday man type watch anyway. So I've got a bunch in here. Some of them have a little different twist to them. They may have a chronograph movement to them, which I still consider them a field watch, just has a chronograph on it. So we're going to leave the category just kind of like that's just what I use to cluster these watches. But typically these watches are going to be kind of like what I thought the dress watches were going to be, mostly on the thin side. I know there's at least one in here. Let me scan real quick. One, probably two, I can tell you right now, are definitely not going to make the cut. They're going to be chunky watches. All right, let's start off with the obvious chunk master, and that is this guy right here, the Hamilton Khaki Field Chronograph. This is a badass looking watch. It really is. And I put the, what is the kind of bracelet? It's the racing bracelet, I think. I forget which company sells this, but it's online. Love the look of this one. I was going to put this on an Orient Kamasu that I had. I got the idea from Shane over at Relative Time. And I was like, well, and I gave that watch away. It's like, well, I think it might fit on this. And I did. Awesome watch. Too chunky. Look at that. I mean, the overall proportions of this, it's just massive. So this is one of those watches I wear when I want to wear a massive watch and just have something massively present on the wrist. Here is the Baltony D12. This is a quartz movement watch. This one is on the webpage for sale. Just not a real fan of the dial, but chunky or not, without the double pass, it wouldn't be. With the double pass, absolutely, it's way too tall. Look at the height off of this watch right here. It's just too tall. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. Double pass, NATO's, you got to watch out for that. This is another Baltony. This is a quartz movement, and I love this one. The bezel actually rotates on this one. Chunky or not, quartz movements typically aren't. I would say this one's not. It's a little bit larger. When you look at the D12 and you look at this watch, you can see the case diameter is much bigger. And overall, yeah, it's not a lot taller, but the case diameter really helps with the proportion, okay? The Caravel, oh, I hate to sell this one, but I am selling it. But as far as chunky or not, absolutely not. This is one of my favorite watches, Indiglo type light on here. But the proportions of this watch are fantastic. Yeah, you're not going to find, the blue one's for sale on Amazon, but I haven't yet to see the green one for a while. It hasn't been out there for a while. So I just had someone from Ireland try to buy it. It's like, well, I'm not shipping across out of the 48 states. So it's just too cost prohibitive. All right, this is the MDC Infantry. All right, chunky or not, I would say close to chunky even with the double pass. Without this, if this was a two-piece strap, this would be really close to the wrist. This would be a fantastic watch if you want something really close to the wrist. I just like the looks of this. I wear this mowing for my lawn maintenance company, and I just love it. Just a great looking watch. We're going to say no for now. It's borderline. All right, here's the Bernie. I don't know what they call this. I call it the field watch because I think this is really a field watch, all titanium. 37 millimeter. I haven't even taken the sticker off the back. I'm still doing the review on this one. All right. I think it's 37 millimeter case diameter, 9 millimeters tall. Yeah, this is definitely thin. Love the profile of this watch as well. One of my favorites, and I have to sell this one. I just don't wear it enough. The Swiss Watch Company Bunker SW200 movement. Again, SW200s tend to have thinner cases, and this one does a great job because the size, this is a big dial. I think this is a 40, maybe a 42 millimeter case diameter, and a really great set of proportions. Definitely not. Love that watch. Over here we have the Kingsbury MS4 Regiment. Oh, I love this watch. Is it chunky? Yes. This is a field watch that's chunky, but this is one of my favorite field watch styles I've seen. I love the yellow second hand. I love the quadrants they have in here. Awesome, 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 awesome. Baltony, vintage military chronograph. Great watch. Again, if this was not a double pass NATO, it wouldn't be on the chunky side. If it was a two-piece, yeah, I'm looking at this right now. Even with the double pass, it's okay. But, yeah, I'm going to put it on the chunky side just to be consistent. Here's the Hemel Islander Check 6 limited edition. And I hate to see this one go, but this was going to go. And, yes, chunky. Goes over here. All right, San Martin SN022. All right, this also has the, I think this is a Seiko NH35 movement. I think there's a ghost date position on here. Is this one chunky? Yes. Unfortunately, it is. But, I say but, I love this dial. Full lume dial. Look how simple that is. It does not get any more simple than that. Man, I love that. Let's going to go over here. And we have a couple left. We have the Zelos Swordfish, and this is the, what is it called? Not the Ember. I think this is just the Swordfish Field Watch. Great leather strap. And this is the strap that I use to show that, you know, Casio, you can make the holes closer together because these guys did. Now, chunky or not? Yeah, I'm going to say it is chunky, unfortunately. Now, I started out thinking that the field watches were going to be less chunky. But some of these are, when you put chronographs in there, let's see, we've got 2 chronographs over here. Yeah, that just happens when you have chronographs because you got all those hands you got to get around. Last but not least is the Vero. This is the Backcountry Horseman, and I love this watch. This is great. I put a compass on here, so it's totally ready for the outdoors for me in the mountains here. Chunky or not, I'm going to say, there we go, get that up there. The bull bar was sticking down below. Chunky or not, I'm going to say absolutely. It is. It's chunky. But here's the nice thing about this. With the Velcro strap, you can cinch this thing down so there's hardly any wobble whatsoever on your wrist. Is that a field style watch? I don't know. I put it over here, field style. So we got 2, 5 to 7. Yeah, I guess it's majority are not. But proportion-wise, you can see, let's take some of the watches here that I think are the best versus some questionable ones like this collaboration. When you look at these 2 watches, you can see what I'm talking about when it comes down to the proportion, okay? And it just gets a closer feel to the wrist. And when you have a heavier watch that's higher off the wrist, you really have to make sure the bracelet fits well and that it fits more snugly. And some of these, yeah, that's where I prefer to have with the top heavy type watches. I prefer to have a 2-piece strap. This guy right here is just a beast. Now I do have an adjustable strap or adjustable bracelet so I can cinch that down when I need to, and I can expand it when I don't. So it's an easy, and that I made sure of this because of how heavy this was up on top. So when you do have those chunky watches, I think this is probably one of the best ways to mitigate that is to have, especially if it's a bracelet, and that is to have a adjustable on the fly clasp. So looking forward to the comments on this section. This is where the problem becomes evident. These are the sport style watches. There's one in here, let's see, at least one in here that's kind of a dive style watch, but I'm going to call it a sport watch for now because it just has a sportier feel to it than it does a dive watch feel to it. So we'll go with that. Also, I have another sport watch in here that's, yeah, it's got to be a sport watch. I'm just going to leave it at that. All right, let's go through and nail these guys down. This is the Casio, what is this, the MTD something. MTD 1074. I just wore this watch to work today. Love this quartz movement, very accurate. I love the minute hand on here. Yeah, this is definitely a thin watch. We're gonna go with thin on that one. Here is the Addie's Dive. I don't know, the desert. There's a number on it. I can't remember what it was. It's the Sea Hunter. What was it called? The Sea Hunter something. But this is a quartz movement. Great looking sports style watch, and also great little bracelet on here. It's cheap, but it does the job. I like it a lot. Thin or not? Definitely thin. Okay, we're going to put that in the thin category over here. The second hour Mandala limited edition with the Miyota movement in here. Definitely on the thin side, but although it's getting a little bit tall, but part of that's the crystal sticking up. I love that one. My wife actually loves the bracelet on that one. She likes to run her finger across it because it just feels, I don't know, feels unique or something. This is the Baltony. I call it the Nautica. But this one has, I forget, I think this is the NH38 movement in it. Chunky or not? Definitely, I think, on the chunky side. Okay, definitely on the chunky side. We'll put that over here. Oh, the Red Star chronograph, the bullhead, yeah, chunky, and it gets thicker on the top end up by the pushers. Okay, this is the Sugis Daytona homage, and yeah, it's definitely. I was going to say definitely on the chunky side, probably questionable. I'm going to say yes for now. We'll say no on the next one. This is the Pagani design. I think this is the 1778. And is this a chunky, thick watch? I don't think so. I think that's clearly not when you look at the proportions on this watch. All right. We have the Proxima Explorer Ranger / Ranger homage on here. This is also this is mechanical movement, and they do a good job of keeping the thickness of this one down. And the size of the dial, I believe this is a 40, and I wanted the bigger one because, again, it just has a better look to me. So I'm going for a bigger dial when I know there's a mechanical. I tend to go a little bit bigger. Put in the comments down below what you think of that strategy. If you go with a mechanical watch, try to go maybe a millimeter or two bigger on the diameter because it's just not going to have that chunky feel to it. Here's the Bernie. What is it? The AM439M. I just finished the review on this watch. This is such a cool summertime watch, but it is thick. It is thick. All right, we're going to put that one over here. We have one of my favorite watches that's totally mislabeled by Zelos. They call this a field watch. This is the Aurora Titanium Field watch. This is a sport watch. But is it chunky? Absolutely. All right. Miyota movement on here. Great loom. By the way, this one's for sale, limited edition. But it's just such a great looking watch. And it has an adjustable clasp on there. So, yeah, that's a chunky watch. The Seiko SKA791, I think it is. This is a kinetic movement. And so that means the rotor in the backside charges up a capacitor or a battery. And then it goes off of that to run the quartz movement. So it's this combination of automatic style movement and quartz accuracy. So yeah, this is not chunky. All right, I like it. Does a great job of not being chunky. The Islander pen. Yeah, the Islander pen. What a great looking watch. Automatic. I think this is a 36, and I was hesitant to buy this. Every time I look on it, oh, it's a great looking watch. And then I look down and it's like, oh, it's 36 millimeters. That means it's going to be chunky. And yeah, it is. When you look at this watch profile compared to the width, it is definitely a chunky watch. So there you go. These are all the sport watches. Chunky on the left, not so on the right. Tell me what you think about this in the comments down below. Let's get the red star in there a little bit closer. There you go. There's the dividing line. All right, everybody where they're supposed to be. Let me know what you think. Again, if you got any offers you want on these watches, I got to sell some of these watches. They're just too many. Moving on. All right, next up we have the pilot watches, or the alleged pilot watches. I say that because there's one watch in here that they call a pilot watch. Actually, there's two of them. They call a pilot watch, and I'm not so sure that it's actually a pilot watch. I think it's more of a sport watch, or maybe even a field watch. All right, let's start off with the obvious, which is the Citizen Nighthawk ProMaster. Great, great watch. Chunky or not, absolutely chunky. Very stout watch, but you know they try. The dial is big because you've got all of the slide rule markings on here for conversions, things like that, for doing calculations. To even get it to that point, you still have to have a wide dial, but they also have a GMT movement in here, so it's a four-hander. Whenever you have a four-hander, things get taller automatically because you have to clear all those hands. Echo, what do they call this? The Echo Drive, I almost said Echo Style. Echo Drive movement, quartz, awesome watch. This one, I may have to part with this one. So again, you got any ideas on these, let me know if you want to throw an offer my way. I'll let you know if it's definitely not going to happen, which is this one right here. And this is the Rudland Turbine Pilot. Love this watch. Fantastic watch. This is like the kid in me. I bought a watch here with the rotating turbine secondhand on here. It's like some kind of like a carnival style watch or something like that. I love it. Chunky or not? Definitely not. I think this, I shouldn't say definitely. This is close. It's big enough to where it can handle the size, the height off the wrist. Now, when you compare that to the Nighthawk, you can see the differences here. First of all, the height off the wrist is much higher. They're very similar in the size of the case. So the case size is fairly similar, but you can see what happens when you get the profile on here. One looks a little bit more stout than the other one. So we're going to put this over here on the non-chunky side. Here, let's pull up the Glycine Airman. Another big watch, dial-wise. I think this is 44 millimeters across the case. But look at that. Very, very thin, relatively speaking, so definitely a non-stout watch. The Notice Sector Blackbird. Okay, stout or not, I think this is actually on the thicker side because of how short it is, how small it is. If this dial case size was bigger, I don't think it would have that same problem, but I think it is a little bit on the chunky side. Here is the alleged pilot watch, the San Martin Pilot. I don't know, you tell me. Does that look like a pilot watch? Or does that look more like a field watch or maybe even a sport watch? I love, again, the Art Deco, the graduations that go up to the crystal. That's just so cool. Chunky or not, I would say, I'm going to say no this time. I'll probably say yes in the next one. The next questionable one, that is. The Bernie Flieger. Okay, when you have something that's only 9 millimeters thick, but I think this is a 37 millimeter case. You would think that this is like really thin, close to the wrist, and it is, but it's also a small dial, small case. So it's not as, proportionally, it's not as thin as you might think. And the last one is the, I'm going to draw the blank on this one. It is the, not the Mercur, this is the Miltado. There it is, the Miltado ML4. Just did the review on this one, quartz movement. Chunky or not, I would say no. I think this is a larger diameter. I think this is 40, and I want to say it's 12 plus. So it's on the border. If it's on the border, I have to say yes. All right, so I'm going to say yes. Stick over there. All right, here we go. One of my classics from long ago is the Bulova A15. Is this stout? Absolutely, especially when you put a double pass NATO on here, which is what I did. I took the single leather straps, two-piece leather strap off and put the double pass NATO on here. I just think this is such a cool NATO strap. So yeah, this is a high off the wrist kind of setup here. One of the things I found though is with a thin leather NATO strap with such a tall watch, you put a lot of pressure on that pin buckle and on that leather hole, which it's not real thick leather either. So just a caution out there on that one. But yeah, this is definitely a stout. Well, I don't know. Let's see if you take the double pass NATO out. Maybe not. I'm going to say yes. I've always felt this was a kind of a high off the wrist. I think it's because there's more of the double pass NATO. Anytime you put a double pass NATO on, it just gets more and more height off the wrist. So there you go. There's the two sections. On the right, we have the not so stout, and on the left, we also have the stout or chunky style watches. So that's when I'm paying attention to what I'm wearing on the wrist and I don't want to bump into stuff. I'm more cautious with these watches. I'm less concerned with these watches. All right, we have a mass of dive watches. Let's do the dive watch section. This is going to be hard to not find any dive watches that are chunky, that have that kind of really thick feel overall. But there's a few in there I know of because I know when I wear them. And we're going to start off with the most obvious dive watch, that is the Super Chunk. This is like Super Chunk cookies, and that is the Citizen. I always hold it upside down because I always think that the depth control, the depth knobs over here are chronograph buttons. But this is the Citizen Aqualand Pro Master. Is this chunky? If you don't think this is chunky, I don't know. You got to watch what you eat. This is definitely chunky. All right. Next, let's go with another super chunk. The Borealis Sea Storm. Yeah, this is definitely a chunky watch. Very tall. We're going to put this over here. We're going to separate these out. Over time, when we get to the end of this, you'll see the piles completely separated. I got them all mixed up in here. Next up, let's do, here, the Citizen. This is the Citizen NY 040, the SKX killer, the one that outlasted the SKX. It's still in production. And I don't know if it's still in production, but there's still plenty of them out there, and at a good price too. Is this chunky or not? I don't think so. I think this watch is actually, this is one of the dive watches that I think is not. We're going to put this over here for now, and to just make space for it, we're going to get the steel dive. This is the 1970 Willard. Is it chunky or not? It is definitely chunky. You're not going to find a lot, again, like I said, of watches that are not chunky. Now this one, this is the Wise Adamascus AD8. This is one of the few that is not, and it is beautiful. Look at that. I mean, very compact, slim to the wrist, dive watch, 200 meters of water resistance. You're not sacrificing water resistance when you're not a chunky watch. This is the Zelos Aurora. This is the Swordfish Ember. The Swordfish Ember. Chunky or not? Yeah, I would say this is chunky. We'll put that over here. We'll do the other one next to it. Let's get some of these Zelos out of the way. The Hammerhead bronze super chunk. I love this watch. This watch is, look at how the bronze has just patinaed. I don't know if you saw if you go back and look at my review on this, you will see this is drastically different from where it is right now. Look how dull, that's just so cool. So cool. And that's what I was looking forward to, was the color with the strap, just really adding a lot of character to it. This is the Ixindao. This is the 5303 homage. Is it chunky? I say no. I think they've done a great job on this. This has the Swiss SW200 movement in it as well. Sometimes the movement has a lot to do with whether or not it's chunky. Let's grab this guy out of here. What is this one? Ooh, the San Martin SN036 or 0036. I can't remember. It's a 300 meter water resistance, so that's almost going to guarantee, yeah, it's thick. It's not super thick though. When you look at, let's say, the Sea Storm, this is 300 meters of water resistance as well. So these are both 300 meters of water resistance. I think you can see the Borealis is a little bit thicker. It looks like the bezel is a little bit taller on that one. So we'll just kind of say that that's the case. The Laurier Hydra Zulu GMT, awesome. This is also, I think this is a Miyota Movement, the 9000 series, so high beat. Is it chunky? It is actually chunky. Now this is an example of a smaller watch, smaller diameter, and it's just too tall for that diameter. Plus you've got a very high proud acrylic crystal on the top. So yeah, this one's going to go in the chunk pile. Let's see what else we got. Oh yeah. Yeah, it's hard to say this one is not chunky. The Seiko Samurai with the razor wire bracelet on here. Love it. Absolutely love the design. I love the angular design on this one. You're going to see the next one I'm going to pull up here. Has that same angular design. It's the Revlot Hex Mariner 39. Awesome watch. Is it chunky? I don't think so. I think this one is not. It's a 39 millimeter case, but I just don't see this one as being as chunky. So perception-wise, I'm going to put that over here. And so this is another Ixendow. This is the Tudor Pelagos homage, I think it is. It's a Tudor homage for sure. And this one is also, I don't think this one is chunky either. This one has the PT5000 movement in it. Really like this one a lot. Oh, you like it because Tudor made a great design. Okay, fine, whatever. I'm not paying as much. The Helm Miyaku. Super chunk, folks. This one is chunky. Definitely. It has a little bit of a protrusion of the case back. It's just a tall watch. Great looking watch. I sold the black one and I kept the blue one, and yeah. So again, I'm just going to remind you with each of these sections, if there's a watch out here that you're interested in, I've got too many watches. I got to start selling these off a little faster. So I'm going to start taking people's proposals on these watches. And here we go, the last one, the Signum Cuda Titanium. This is with an aftermarket strap, obviously. Is this a chunky watch? I don't think so. I think this watch is not. All these dive watches are going to sit higher on the wrist. They're just dive watches. But I'm going to say no. So what we have here, I feel like I'm quoting from Cool Hand Luke. You know, the guy says, what we have here is a failure to communicate. Let's get these guys over here. So these are the chunky watches over here, and these are the non-chunky watches. All right, so I'll make the list. We'll put it up there. What do you think of that? If you've got any of these, let me know. Put in the comments down below. We'll move on to the next section. All right, this next section is probably the most popular section of any videos that I do on my YouTube channel, and that is Casio watches. So we have two fistful of Casio watches. I forget how many are in there, but I think it's over 20. And we're going to go through these Casio watches, find out which ones are chunky. You put in your mind what you think is a chunky Casio watch. So if you're a Casio fan and you fast forwarded to this part of the video, this chapter, let's hear what you have to say about whether or not you think these are chunky versus not chunky. Now, chunky, for me, there's a time and a place for chunky, and with a Casio watch, most of the time, I'm not really that interested in chunkiness. I do have a few that are chunky, and I like it because I want to have that visual presence. Obviously, that happens with all the watches here. But I'm kind of curious to see what you have to say about chunky versus not chunky. There may be some stray dog hairs in here as I pulled this off the carpet, but here's one fistful of Casios. There's the other one. All right. So we have kind of your more typical kind of Casio non-G-Shocks over here. We have a few more Casios over here that are G-Shock or G-Shock-esque. Like they have that, they're trying to look a little bit more G-Shock, okay? So let's go through the clearly non-G-Shock, although I think there's a couple of G-Shocks in over here. I think we got the Casio and we got the Square mixed into this bunch. So, all right, as far as chunky or not chunky, the Casio CA53, this is the calculator watch. Let's see here if we can get this back to the home time. There we go. The CA53, definitely not chunky. Great watch. Love it. DBC32, chunky or not? I would say probably not. I don't mind this one. It's a longer watch. This one fits over the wrist a lot further. If it was more higher on this side of the, like where the keypad is, then I'd probably feel like it's more chunky in the wrist. I've never noticed this one to be too chunky. You know, you have to kind of watch out what you're doing. This is, oh, there's the F201. Love this watch. Great watch. Definitely not chunky. Look at this. Okay, what is this, 100 meters of water resistance? No, that's just water resistance, so it's less than 30, according to Casio. And I get emails, or I get comments all the time. Oh, that's overrated. I'm sure it's overrated, but they have bean counters that decide, you know, what's the warranty return rate, and they just say what the resistance is. So the W800, the gray man, the legend. I wear this one to work all the time. Definitely chunky. Okay, the proportions on this one I think are chunky. So we're gonna put this over here in the chunky pile for starters. Keep on moving. This is the GA2300, which I just did a review on this one. Very G-Shock, because it is a G-Shock, but it has very much, I would say, kind of a Casio look to it. Is it chunky? Absolutely chunky. We're going to put this over here in the chunky watch pile. All right, what do we have here? Oh, the F91. Chunky or not? It's lacking in so many ways, but it's definitely not overextending itself on its chunkiness. All right, next, we have the W201. Chunky or not? I would say probably not. I'm going to put this over here. The W201. Put that over there. Oh, here's a G-Shock. This is the Casio. Got to wipe the dust off this one. This is the Casio. Chunky or not? Definitely not. This one, I think, because the case diameter is wider, it just gets away with some of the G-Shock height. So I'm going to say not over here. All right, what do we have? Oh, the Square. The Casio Square, chunky or not? Ooh, I'm going to say not. It's too small. I don't think it's that high off the wrist. Matter of fact, I think it's very close to the Casio. It's a little bit shorter, but you have that form-fitted strap on there that kind of feels like it extends the case out a little further. The Timex, this is the Classic 30. Did a review on this one. I love this watch. This is great. Chunky or not, it is absolutely chunky. All right. Now, this, I'm going to get some feedback on this one. This is the ProTrek PRW 6600Y. Chunky or not? This is not chunky. Why? Because the dial is so big. The diameter of this, I'm sorry, not the dial, but the case is so big. It really has a good proportional feel to it. It's a big watch, yes, but is it chunky? No. I don't think it has that overly thick feel to it. The GD350, the Porker, the Grunt. Yeah, definitely chunky. That's a G-Shock. And what do we got? I think I know what this next one is. I think this is the AE. Nope. The WS1700. Chunky or not? Definitely chunky. This is where when it comes to Casios and they start doing some of this case design on here, it's like, why do you have to put so much plastic on here? It would be so much easier on the wrist if you just kind of slimmed it down. All right, next up, this is the AE1500. Yep, the AE1500. All right, one of my favorites. Is it chunky or not? Yes, not by much. The WS1700 is also not by much either, but definitely it's going to be on the chunky side. It just is so tall. It's not real wide. Oh, the Big Sky. Whoops, upside down. The Big Sky. What is this? The W736. Yeah, definitely chunky. It's short. It's tall, and it's short. I say diameter-wise. I call that short. The diameter on this one is definitely not big enough for that. And then we have the DRW? I always forget this one. The DW290. The DW290, the Mission Impossible watch, chunky or not, it is a chunk. All right, so this is the chunk that we got going on over here. This is what I would say is not the chunky side. And we got a bunch of watches. And we'll try and get a photograph of all these so that you can see what I consider chunky or not. Last but not least, our two weird watches. One of them I just received, and not sure if I wanted to put this out there, but I'm going to put it out there anyway. And that is this Bulova, and I forgot the model number is, but this Bulova watch is absolutely massive. I think this is the tallest watch I have off the wrist, and you can see here it is a chunk of steel. Now this is a chronograph. It's a precisionist movement. So when you look at that second hand, that is the second hand for the time. And when you press this button down here at the 8 o'clock position, it changes the format to a chronograph. And so that second hand for time goes to the 12 o'clock position and waits for you to start and stop for the chronograph. Absolutely just cool movement. I love the movement. And I thought I was going to, just take a chance on something that's just a little bit out there. And I'm not sure I like this one either, but I haven't done the review on it yet either. So it's definitely on the chunky side of the watch system here. And the last one is the Olam. If you've seen, I think I had this one out there with the live stream with Paul Whaley, and we did this. This isn't that chunky of a watch on the wrist. It really isn't. It fits rather slim to the wrist. It's just so broad. Like this covers like pretty much California over to Iowa if this was on a map. Like it's just so wide. But at the same time, because it's so wide, it doesn't feel that chunky on the wrist. Now you compare this height to a lot of other watches that are a lot smaller diameter, and you're going to see that this watch really is pretty thick. But overall, I like wearing this. I get comments on this watch like, what is that? And I'll say, well, it's a dual time zone watch because it has 2 quartz movements, 2 watches, completely independent from each other. They have their own batteries, and then I also have the compass down here, and I have a thermometer up here in degrees Canadian. So, yeah, it's a pretty chunky watch. So these are the 2 weirdos that are out there. I don't know what to put these in. If this was a sport watch, outdoor watch, like I don't even know what to do with these 2 watches. But obviously, chunky style watches. Now, why would I have these 2 watches on here? And that's because, well, frankly, when you want to make a statement, or if you want to have just a big watch, you just want to have something really tall on the wrist, this is the way to go. And so, to me, that's what these 2 watches are for. So, there you go. I have one left. Oh, I missed this one. It's the Drift. This is the AliExpress. Now, when you look at the size of this watch, the dial on this is big. I think this is a 42 millimeter dial, but the overall thickness is not too bad. This is a manual wind, and I love the look of this watch. Just absolutely love it. This is the same movement that's in the Rudland Turbine Pilot, which to this day is no more than 1 second off. And I've been wearing it on and off now for months. This is the same movement, and I'm getting the same results. It's very close to I think it's probably like 2 or 3 seconds off a day for manual wind. And just a beautiful watch. Now, again, proportions, big dial, big case, but not too tall, and it just feels like it is thinner on the wrist. So there you go. Those are all the watches. You just saw everything in my collection, including a few watches that I haven't done reviews on yet. So I'm looking forward to your comments to see what you think of proportions, and the proportion chart that I used. Did that kind of match up with some of the watches that you have in your collection maybe? So start looking at the case diameter and the height off the wrist and see if those give you any insight as far as that thick feel on the wrist or thin feel on the wrist. I call it chunky, whatever you want to call it. And let me know what you think in the comments down below. My name is Tim. This has been another Real Ideal Gear Review. We'll catch you guys next time.